Hello, government students. Today we are doing notes 1.4 on federalism. So that is Unit 1, our fourth set of notes. This will be our last set of notes for Unit 1 in government about the Constitution. We'll be moving on after this to Unit 2, and we'll be looking at the legislative branch. But as for today, we are doing notes 1.4. So we're going to go ahead and view and present these. Don't forget to write a title, 1.4 Federalism, and write down your essential question. What is federalism and why was it chosen by the framers? So again, if you like to take Cornell notes, these are some guiding questions that you could write down on the left-hand side if you choose to do that. So why federalism? The framers were dedicated to the concept of limited government. Remember, they were just coming from having a king who was all powerful, who could control any aspect of their lives. So they wanted to prevent that. They wanted to have a smaller government, limited government. So they were convinced that government power poses a threat to individual liberty. If we give the government too much power, then it's going to hurt individuals. Second, that power must be restrained. We must create ways within the system to restrain anyone from having too much power. And three, we have to divide government power to prevent its abuse. Absolute power corrupts absolutely. We wanted to prevent that from happening. So remember, as we were talking earlier, the Constitution was written, the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, and they decided that they wanted to express their ideas in this written document of limited government. So federalism is a system of government which a written constitution divides the powers of the government between a central government and several regional governments. So in the United States, for us, that is between the central government, the federal government in Washington, D.C., and the state governments in each of the 50 states. The Constitution provides for a division of powers. So there are certain powers that the national government has, and then there are certain powers that are given to the states specifically. The national government is a government of delegated powers, meaning that it only has the powers that are granted to it by the Constitution. So there's three types of delegated powers. Express powers, number one, are those that are found directly within the Constitution. Number two are implied powers. These are not stated in the Constitution, but they're reasonably suggested or implied by the expressed powers. And then three is the inherent powers. So there are few inherent powers. An example is the national government's ability to regulate immigration. So this just makes sense that the national government would be able to handle because the United States is an enormous country and there's so many ways to enter and exit the country. So we have to regulate immigration from a national standpoint rather than each individual state or airport, anyone that has a border, things like that. National government takes care of. So the delegated powers, an example of all of these, an expressed power in the Constitution, directly said in the Constitution, is the power to coin money. Remember, the Articles of Confederation had different money for each individual state of the 13 colonies. So we didn't want to have that anymore. We wanted to have one universal type of money for the entire nation. And that's what we have today. Implied powers are assumed to exist because they are required to implement express powers of Article 1 of the Constitution. So implied powers would be like the Commerce Clause, the ability for the federal government to handle all the highways and freeway systems that we have. I think right here in Sacramento, we have Highway 50 and Highway 80. Those go interstate, so they go between different states. So it makes sense that the federal government would handle that. And then inherent powers, logically, again, powers of the federal government, like immigration, such a huge thing for states to be able to handle. Powers are denied to the national government in three distinct ways. Some powers are expressly denied in the Constitution. Some powers are denied because the Constitution is silent on the issue. And then some powers are denied because the federal system does not intend for the national government to carry out those functions. So, powers that are denied, like the national government can't give you a forced religion. They can't require you to be Christian or Catholic or Muslim or Jewish. They cannot force any religion on you. It is expressly denied to them in the Constitution. Powers reserved to the states. So, the 50 states of the United States have their own powers as well. The 10th Amendment to the Constitution declares that the states are governments of reserved powers. Okay, so the reserved powers are those that the Constitution doesn't grant to the national government and does not at the same time deny them to the states. So that's why we have different laws in different states. For example, marijuana is now legal in California if you're over the age of 21. You can purchase it and you can consume it in the privacy of your own home. But it is not legal in all 50 states. Some states it is still very much illegal, so it really depends on what state you're in. Powers denied to the states can both be expressly and inherently denied. Powers denied to the states are things that are given to the national government. The states can also not choose to create a law that goes against the Constitution. Exclusive powers are powers that can be exercised by the national government alone. Exclusive meaning one, only the national government can do that. So, for instance, the power to coin money. We can't let all 50 states go and create their own money. That's just going to make things too confusing for Americans. So, instead, that is an exclusive power to the national government. The national government also only has the ability to make treaties. States are not allowed to make treaties, and taxing imports. So things that we are bringing into our country, the national government has the power to tax them. Concurrent powers, if you remember concurrent from your math classes, concurrent are two things that happen at the same time. So concurrent powers are powers that both the national and the state government can possess. So they both can collect taxes. They both can collect different kinds of taxes, but they both can collect taxes. Any of you that are working already, if you've noticed on your pay stubs, you will see you have federal taxes going out and you also have state taxes going out. Both federal government and state governments can define what is a crime, and they can set their own punishments for crimes. They can claim private property for public use. That's called public domain if they want to do that. So if they wanted to expand, let's say, the freeway in West Sacramento, if they wanted to make it wider, they could take the land that's around the freeway in eminent domain and they could say that this is now our land. We need it in order to help the city of West Sacramento. There are more than 87,000 units of local government in the United States today. Each state has created their units through their constitution and their laws. So California has its own constitution, California has its own laws. We have the government in Sacramento for the whole state of California, and then we also have the governments in each individual city, like West Sacramento. Those are our local governments, and they exercise state law through their own means. This is our mayor in West Sacramento. So he is the head executive of West Sacramento. And we have our representatives of West Sacramento meet here at the City Hall building. The federal system determines the ways that powers are divided between a national government and our state governments. So this kind of shows you here, the blue is all the national powers, the orange is the state powers, and the purple here is concurrent powers. So those are powers that both the state governments and the national governments have. Remember, the Constitution of the United States is the supreme law of the land. So everybody can make their own rules and regulations as long as they don't break the Constitution. They have to follow along the Constitution. So cities can make their own ordinances, their own rules within a city. States can make their own laws and constitutions. Congress of the federal government can create laws for the whole nation, but all of it has to fall within the rules of the Constitution. The national government and the 50 states. The Constitution requires every state to be a Republican form of government. Now, that doesn't mean Republican like Republicans and Democrats. Remember, that means Republican as in a representative democracy. So, us being able to elect people for our republic who represent us. The national government is required to protect against invasion and internal disorder, so the national government has to create a military. The military isn't state militaries, it's a national military, so it's a US Army, not a California state army. We also have to have respect for territories within the states. So, although California has the largest population, we can't just say we need more land and scoot over into Arizona and take their state. We have to respect their territory and their integrity of a state. The federal government also steps in if there's ever a major disaster. In 2020, we've had quite a few major disasters. Right now, part of our nation is dealing with hurricanes, so the federal government can step in and help out with those hurricanes. Right here in California, we are dealing with wildfires, so the federal government can send in firefighters and assistance that we need here in California to help us out. And the federal government is helping the entire nation with the disaster of the COVID crisis right now. If a new state wants to be admitted into the United States, only Congress has the power to do that. So Congress first passes what we call an enabling act, an act directing the people of that territory to write their own constitution. So, for instance, Puerto Rico has been discussed as being our 51st state. Puerto Rico is a territory. Puerto Rico is part of the United States. All Puerto Ricans are Americans. But if they wanted to become a state, they would have to write a state constitution, and then it would have to go to Congress, and Congress would have to pass it as an act of admission. So they would have to create a new state. So if we do have a new state in your lifetime, it will probably be the 51st state of Puerto Rico. But it doesn't happen very often. We actually haven't admitted any states since 1959. The last two states to be admitted to the Union were Hawaii and Alaska. Cooperative federalism. So, even though federalism is about the division of power between different levels of government, there's actually a lot of cooperation that happens between the federal and the state governments. So, things like grant programs. Grants are free money. So, grants are money that comes from the government and is given for specific things. It's paid for by taxes. But federal money that's given to the states to deal with different things for federal grants. You may have also heard of student grants. So, when you all apply for FAFSA, when you go to college and you apply for your financial aid, you might be offered a grant. A grant is free money that the tax dollars have paid for to give you so that you can have more money for college. There's three types of grants and aid. There's categorical grants that are for a specific, clearly defined purpose. So, like school lunch programs, free and reduced lunches, those are paid for by federal grants. Those are paid for by tax dollars. Block grants are for more broad purposes. They're things like healthcare. So when President Obama was in office, a block grant would have been for like Covered California or for Obamacare, as people called it, for social services, for different kinds of welfare programs. Project grants are for specific projects. So our school has a separate campus, the Bright campus. The Bright campus was actually paid for by a project grant. So it was a grant that they had to apply and they pay for to pay for all the awesome facilities that they have over at the Bright campus. All right, interstate relations. This will be our last section, interstate relations. So how states work together. So no state may enter into a treaty, alliance, or confederation, but they can enter into what we call interstate compacts. So these are agreements amongst themselves. So, for instance, many states have agreed to participate in sharing law enforcement data. So they, instead of having different police offices for each different city or each different state, they have databases. So they have things like DNA databases and fingerprint databases, and they share those with other states in case someone is committing a crime in one state and then goes to another state, they can share that information. They also have conservation, so things about the environment. Different states have agreed together to protect the environment. The full faith and credit clause of the Constitution ensures that states recognize laws and documents and court proceedings of other states. So before we had marriage equality in 2015 at the Supreme Court level, Some states had marriage equality and some states did not allow marriage equality. So some states would only let men and women get married to each other. So the full faith and credit clause, says that states had to recognize each other's documents. So meaning if you were an LGBTQ couple and you got married in one state and then in California, for example, and let's say you moved to Arizona, Arizona would still have had to consider you a married couple at the time. Extradition is the legal process by which a fugitive has to be returned from one state to another state. So this is if you commit a crime in California, and let's say you flee to Oregon, you drive up to Oregon and you're gonna get away from all the problems in Oregon, but the police catch you in Oregon. Extradition is when the police can bring you back to California to face your trial in California. So either police can do that or bounty hunters can do that, which is why I have Mando and Baby Yoda or Boba Fett, because those are bounty hunters. The Privileges and Immunities Clause says that no state can draw an unreasonable distinction between its own residents and people who happen to live in other states. So, for instance, if you just moved to California, you cannot receive lower welfare benefits because you just arrived here to California than if you came here from Arizona, say something like that. But they can draw reasonable distinctions between different residents. So for those of you who are planning on going to college out of California, out of state, they can charge you more. There's something called out-of-state tuition. So for instance, I went to college in New York and they did charge me more for my first year because I wasn't considered a resident. So they charged me out-of-state tuition, which was more tuition than in-state tuition for those who lived within the state. And that is the end of your notes for today, so don't forget to write a summary. We're going to turn all 4 of these sets of notes for Unit 1 in together.